Hi, I'm Bethan. I'm Finley's mother, and this is Finn. This photograph was taken whilst he was in hospital during the few days before he was diagnosed. It was a couple of things really before he was diagnosed where raised alarm bells with us. He never really became ill. As you can see, this photograph was taken the day before he was diagnosed. It was just, we noticed that he was going to the toilet a lot more often, drinking a lot more fluids, but he was potty training at the time, and so we just thought he was becoming paranoid that he was going to have an accident. There was a couple of sort of incidents in the week before he was diagnosed which sort of raised the alarm bells. The electrics blew in our kitchen, and so as a treat I took him and his brother to McDonald's, which was a 10-minute drive away. Because he'd been having these frequent trips to the toilet, I made sure that he went to the toilet before we left. Within 5 minutes of being in McDonald's, he was saying, "I need a wee again," so we took him to the toilet there. We then went across to the supermarket to pick up a couple of things, and as soon as we got there he needed to go to the toilet again. And driving home in the car, he was sort of panicking that he really needed to go to the toilet. That was sort of the first thing, and then the night before I tested him, he woke in the middle of the night saying he needed the toilet. I took him, and then he said, I need a drink, and I had like a large glass of water on the bedside table, which he literally bolted at 2 years of age and then said more, and that was when I kind of knew there was something wrong. The day after, my husband had the day off, and he was sort of looking after him that day, and all day I was in work thinking, this is not right, there's something wrong. I knew the symptoms. One of my colleagues in the office had type 1, but because he was presenting so well, he wasn't ill or anything, it was kind of in the back of my mind, but I sort of had like a mother's intuition, to call it that, if you will, that there was something wrong. And I remember phoning Andrew lunchtime and saying, I'm worried he's got type 1, and he was saying he's been wrestling me all morning and playing football, there's nothing wrong, he's fine. So that evening, my elder son had recently had post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, so we had, my kids like hospitals, so we had urine testing strips at home, and that evening when he said he needed a wee, I just decided to dip his urine, and it went to the highest sort of level for glucose. I phoned the out of hours at that time. They were quite dismissive at first, sort of saying, oh, these strips in date, you know, do you know what they mean? Are you able to read them? I said, yeah, I've been recording my son's urine outputs for months because of this illness that he'd had, my other son. And so she said, oh, you know, we'll make you an appointment, but I'm sure there's nothing to worry about. So I packed a bag for a long stay because I knew deep down that this is what the result was going to be. We took him down to the hospital in Royal Glamorgan. Out of hours, tested his blood sugar, and her face dropped, and I knew straight away. She said, his sugar's so high we can't give you a reading, you need to go straight to the ward. His sugar was found to be 26.2. They were trying to get a line into his arm. At this point he was hysterical. It was sort of late in the evening on a Friday night. There had been no ketones shown up on the urine strip, so I was trying to say, can you not put him through any other procedure now? You know, if the bloods come back with ketones that you've taken, then he needs a line in his arm, but please, can we just wait? So eventually they did agree to leave him, try and have some sleep, and luckily there were no ketones, so he was just treated with his first sort of insulin injection that evening. His HbA1 was found to be 6.9, which, as you know, isn't that bad at diagnosis, so I think we were just very lucky that we knew the signs, and that we did catch it quite early on. First year, we were put onto Novamix 30 injections, which is a mixture of short and long-acting insulin. He needed a half a unit insulin pen because he was very, very sensitive to his insulin needs, and over that first year we had to slowly reduce the amount of insulin that he was getting morning and night. What we did find is a lot of the time he was getting highs before bed, sort of evening into the early morning, and then at 3 o'clock we would quite often be seeing hypos of sort of 2.8 to 3.5. So that first year was quite tough because I was waking him up as a little boy, trying to make him eat jelly babies or drink juice most evenings, at most early mornings, about 3 o'clock in the morning. But he managed exceptionally well. He is a very positive little boy. He started school within 3 months of diagnosis full time. We met with the school and put a care plan together, and our DSN went into school to speak to them. They were extremely supportive. There was at least 8 people who put their name forward to be trained to look after him. He's never needed a one-to-one. He's always had just the normal staff within the school, and I can't fault them. They've been absolutely brilliant. When we were on the Novamix, he sort of had to have a snack at break time to stop him from going low, and he was very restricted in that he sort of had to eat his meals at set times. We had to make sure he was out of bed at a certain time because he was very, very prone to hypos in that first year. I struggled, if I'm honest. I mean, when I was in hospital the first sort of few days, it was quite positive. You were there, you had everybody looking after him. It was quite surreal in a way. And I think the turning point for me was when we got home and we named his insulin his magic pen. The first time I had to give him an injection at home without the healthcare professionals, and he started crying and saying, "No, I'm better now. I don't need my magic pen now, Mammy." And I broke down. And then as soon as he saw me crying, he said, "Oh, don't cry, I'll have my magic pen, I'll have my magic pen." And from that point on, he's been stronger than me. We've always tried to sort of encourage him to live life to the full. I think as parents, you want that child to live a full and happy life and teach them that type 1 doesn't have to stop them from doing anything. And you kind of take the pressure away from them, because whilst he is always happy and smiling and I'm happy and smiling, to him, deep down, it is a battle every single day to try and get the levels that you need to keep him safe. Just to stress me out even further, he broke his wrist 2 months after type 1 diagnosis, and then in that summer he came down with a horrendous case of chicken pox. So that year really was the worst year of my life. But as you can see, he never ever stopped smiling. He's one of the most positive people I know, and he's just taken it on board. And so anything we've asked him to take on, any new technology, he just does it without complaint, really. When we were approached by clinic to potentially start pumping, I was very opposed to the pump. I didn't like the thought of my little boy being attached to a machine and having a wire. And when the consultant sort of sat me down and said, "Well," she said, "you've just given me all the reasons you don't want him to have a pump." And when I went home and thought about it, she was right. It was all, I don't want him to have this, I don't want this stigma, I don't want him to feel like he's attached to a machine. But then we had all these different chats and we looked into it a bit more and realised how much more freedom it would give him. And so less than a year after diagnosis, we went on to the Accu-Check combo. It was the first few days we suffered a lot of hypos, to be honest, because it was trying to get the levels right. But he loved the newfound freedom that he could eat when he felt hungry rather than being forced to eat a cereal bar at a set time every day. He no longer needed the injections, which he absolutely loved. And the school, again, were amazing and just came forward and said, you know, that they would all be trained up to... prior to that, they'd only ever had to finger prick because his injections were morning and afternoon when he got home. But they all immediately signed up to give him his insulin, and we had a queue of people waiting to see the nurse to learn, really. Just after we gave him the option of a pump and saying he could eat what he wanted when he wanted, bam, our annual bloods in June 2014 showed up TTG of over 200 for celiac. This test was repeated and they were again found to be over 200. We had an IgA EMA sent to the Heath in Cardiff, which came back strongly positive as well. And then we were referred to University of Hospital Wales. There was a 6-month waiting list, during which time they wanted me to continue to feed him gluten, which I refused to do. So we paid privately to see Dr. Hugh Jenkins in the Spire, and based on the fact that he was type 1, that he had these 2 levels over 200, he said that was more than enough to diagnose him without the need for a biopsy. And we literally crossed the road and went to Waitrose, where he fleeced me in the free-from aisle with his own scanner. Again, as always, he's been amazing at this. He thinks it's great that he's gluten-free, that he's healthier, and he's never complained, really. He's then, about age 5, started playing rugby for the local club, and this has been the making of him, really. This was his first rugby tour to Bournemouth in 2015, where they came away with a runners-up trophy, which was nearly as big as him. He absolutely loves the sport. He's made some amazing friends. But during that tournament, during a game, I could see there was something not quite right. He was sort of dazed, not switched on to what was going on in the game. And when he just looked over at me with this panic in his eyes, and I pulled him from the pitch and his sugar was 2.1. So he had to sit out for the rest of the game. And it was then really that we kind of realised that if he was going to continue with this sport, we needed something that was going to give us more insight into his blood sugars so that we could try and make sure that that never happened again. So I'd been reading about the Libre for a while and put my name down on the waiting list for it to come through. And I'd had an email just before we'd gone on that rugby tour. But he was a little bit opposed to it, and I've always been of the opinion it's his body. I'm not going to force him to have something that he doesn't want to have when he's obviously dealing with enough already. But I think that situation frightened him a little bit, and so he did agree that he would trial this Libre when we got back from the tour. We ordered it straight away, and we went online, ordered some sort of superhero stickers to stick on there. The insertion was painless and he loved it from the word go. Some of his lowest HbA1s were when he was using the Libre, but it was very prone to, he was still having these hypos in the nights. We were still up at 3 o'clock treating him nearly every night of the week because we just couldn't get that level right because of the amount of sport that he was doing. And so I genuinely think a lot of those HbA1s were lower because we were missing hypos overnight. Over time as well, the lows increased due to sport, but he developed an allergic reaction to the tape. He's allergic to nearly every single medical tape other than Hypofix. He's also got a penicillin allergy. So we realised that we needed something that was going to alert us to those lows in the night, which is when we moved on to the next sort of stage, really. These are just a few photos while we were where we were waiting for, looking into the Dexcom and trying to persuade him to have that. So this is him just enjoying adventures in life, really, and another trophy the year after in the next rugby tour. We moved on to the Dexcom G5 in January, which we self-funded initially. He absolutely loved this because he was able to wear a smartwatch so he could see his levels in school. Again, it was alerting us to rapidly moving blood sugars, enabling us to prevent lows before they happened. He wears the phone in a belt to school, which is on Do Not Disturb, and then he literally only had to check his watch to know what his blood sugars were, so it wasn't disruptive in the classroom. The teachers were really, really supportive and said obviously that it helped him feel better in school. He had less hypos from that. It also helped us with bolusing for different foods, so we could sort of see the effect that pasta and pizza and things were having on him as a trend throughout the night. We were able to tweak the insulin doses really with extended boluses to try and get away from that. The only problem was we were still experiencing these nocturnal hypoglycemias in the early hours of the morning, albeit we were getting alerted in time to stop them from getting low. It was still happening because after sport especially, I just found overnight his blood sugars were very, very difficult to manage. As I said, it helped us really with bolusing for different foods, which is very important when you're thin because the only thing he loves more than rugby is food. So much so he was recently interviewed in the Senedd by one of the assembly members in an event that Diabetes UK was holding, and when he asked what was the most challenging thing about having type 1, he said waiting that extra minute before I can tuck into my food. And that basically sums him up. Again, using photos of him. This is obviously in the Wales game, a World Book Day in school, winning the school sports where him and his brother were in the same house, so they were happy with that. And crabbing on the jetty in West Wales and on the beach in Barafundle Bay. After a clinic appointment in July 2018, it was a really positive appointment where I spoke to a consultant and the nurse, and we talked about how low I had been after his diagnosis back in 2012 and how far things had come. And I decided to start a blog, just basically to be able to sort of vent somewhere. But more importantly, I think when Finn was diagnosed, it was quite a lonely experience. It was quite isolating. And I did have a leaflet within the pack that I was given by the nurse for a local support group, and that helped massively. I think, with all due respect, unless you live with diabetes every day, it's very difficult to understand what it's like, especially with a young child. And so to go to these support groups where there's other people in your position, people that may be in that position for a lot longer than you and can give you advice and tell you things are going to be okay, that is just, you can't get enough of that. And I think they really need to be pushed to people, and people need to be made aware of them. Since I've started writing this, is sort of celebrating his achievements as well as talking about the bad times. I mean, I wanted it to be a positive experience, hence the name. But it has opened up so many different doors to me. I've met so many people from across the world via Instagram. People have reached out to me as newly diagnosed parents, which is quite humbling when I think back to how I felt at that time and how, you know, it's now me trying to help other people, whereas at that point in time I could see no future for us. I use this as well to sort of celebrate all the achievements that he's making over the years, for him to be able to look back on in future to see what he's achieved despite having diabetes. His rugby's gone from strength to strength over the years, and in 2018, at the age of 9, he was selected a year early to represent the Rhondda School's district rugby team. As you can see, he absolutely loves playing, but sport does cause us obviously more problems with managing his blood sugars. He's now taken his tally to 3 different teams. He plays for his local club, he plays for the Rhondda School's district, and he also plays for his school. And this picture here was taken last May when his school won the Super 8's rugby competition at the Card Farms Park, and he actually scored a try, so that's his biggest achievement that he's scored now on the Card Farms Park. Not content with rugby, he, on the complete opposite side of the coin, he was selected by the school to take part in the Stepford. He played the part of Mam, with the Welshest accent you've ever heard in your life. And their group actually got onto the main stage in the Stepford in the Wales Millennium Centre and came second overall out of all the schools in Wales. Last year he went on his first ever school residential without me, up in the Irv. He, as you can see, didn't care less. I was a nervous wreck for 3 days. Luckily, he had the support of the school again, and we had various meetings beforehand, talking about the sort of routine that he would have, all the different activities that he would be doing, and we put a procedure in place of what pre and post blood sugars we wanted to see. The nights were horrendous on that residential course. It was so stressful because they had no internet. So I couldn't follow his blood sugars from home. His teachers couldn't follow them on his phone because they had no internet. And his 2 teachers got up every 2 hours through the night to test him for 2 nights. And they were absolutely shattered when they got home. And I think it just brought it home to them how hard it is to have a child with type 1. Up until we started the DIY loop in last August, I've got up every 2 hours for 8 years, and I'm passionate about night testing. I think a lot of people are told, if they go to bed on a good number, they'll be fine. They won't be fine. I can tell you now that children's basal needs differ every single night. They grow in, they do different things, they eat different foods, and it's something that I'm very, very passionate about. He, as I said, he was fine. He had a whale of a time. You know, a lot of the time they were testing his bloods and he didn't even wake up. But I think on the way home they sort of awarded him with a bravery certificate, because I think they realised for the first time it's not just the 6 hours they see in school every day, it's what he goes through 24/7. And I remember his teacher sending me a photograph and said he's been up all night and he's just scaled the biggest wall you've ever seen without a kid in the world. I don't know how he does it, and he is just that type of kid. He doesn't let anything get him down. His biggest achievement for me was last June when his older brother decided he was going to do the 3 Peaks challenge to raise money for JDRF for looking into a cure for type 1. Finn was nagging for him to be able to do it with Kian, and I just thought it was too much. Eventually I gave in and said, okay, well, I'll do it with you then. And in last June, age 10, he climbed Snowdon Cadre de San Pen in just 32 hours, and we managed somehow to do that without a single hypo. Again, without the Dexcom, we could never have done it. I had his watch on. We were sort of monitoring his bloods every half an hour, and if we could see a drop in, we were sort of giving him some carbs, and it was the best feeling in the world when we got to the top of Penrhyn on that Sunday evening with a lot of people there to support us as well. And I just couldn't believe but even worse than that, me, actually managed to achieve it. We upgraded then to the Dexcom G6 as soon as we could from the G5. It was a 10-day wear, it was more cost effective, it was easier insertion so that he could actually do it himself, because I don't know if a lot of you have seen the Dexcom G5 insert. It looks like some kind of medieval device. He was unable to do that himself, and now he sort of does everything himself. So he inserts his own cannulas, he does his own sensor changes. He likes to be independent, and that's something that I've encouraged through the years but not forced on him. I think it has to be their own decision. So he's loved the Dexcom G6. Again, it was giving us sort of urgent low soon notifications, a slimmer transmitter, and whilst his HbA1s weren't terrible, they were higher than I wanted them to be. And as he was getting older and doing more and more sport, I just felt we needed to look into something, because we needed to know that he was going to be safe throughout the night. So that's kind of when we started looking then at the DIY loop, and it literally has changed our life. So I was aware of a friend of mine who lives in West Wales whose daughter was looping with a DIY loop, so I'd been chatting with her for a while, and it was just the technology side that was putting me off really, but the documentation online is excellent. If you follow it to the letter, you can't really go wrong. So what we needed to be able to set this up was just a basic Android phone. The smartwatch is optional, a compatible pump. We use the AccuCheck combo, but the Insight, some Dana RS pumps and older Medtronics can also be used. And then we needed to set up what is called a Night Scout website, which is where all the information is dragged from for the DIY loop to work. So everything is in the cloud. This Night Scout website is where I hold all of Finn's information. So you can see in these screens here, I've got his insulin to carb ratios, his insulin sensitivity factors and his basal rates, and then his targets for different times of the day as well. All of that is held in the cloud, and then the app drags that information through to make treatment decisions. So any changes are made online, and then you click a button and it downloads it to the app, and the app runs all the insulin algorithms then within the system. There's lots and lots of safety factors. I understand a lot of people are rightly so wary then of allowing a sort of automated system that's not medically approved to be able to deliver insulin. You are in control of a lot of the safety factors, so you can cap the insulin at what you think is a safe level for your child. There's also recommendations within the system, and I think most importantly there are 6 weeks of objectives that you've got to meet before you can actually go live on the closed loop. So you need to sort of understand how the system works and prove that you can understand how the system works before it will actually allow you to close that loop. I know a lot of people think, oh, this is amazing, you know, turn it on, press go, and it'll run it for you. That isn't the case, unfortunately. We had to tweak a lot of things in that 6 weeks. Most importantly, insulin delivery, duration of insulin action, was extended to 6 hours, which was 2 hours prior to that on his pump. And that was gradually extended because with the way that the loop works, it will automatically take into account what insulin is still on board from bolus or basal over the preceding hours. This is then the calculator that you've got within the system. So whereas prior to the loop we had an AccuCheck combo handset, we'd put in the carbs, the carb ratio would calculate the insulin, you'd press go, deliver, that would be the end of it. This is now all his boluses go through his phone, and this is the calculator that he uses. So all these different things are taken into account when the system is calculating how much insulin he actually needs. So you've got your blood sugar, and it will have the insulin sensitivity factor there to decide whether he needs a little bit of a tweak to that. You've got any trends that he's had over the 15 minutes, so it'll take into account what direction the blood sugar is going. It'll take into account the carbohydrates that they still think he's got on board from the last time he's eaten, the bolus insulin on board, so from the last time he's had insulin for food or corrections, and then also the basal insulin he's got on board, and that will automatically then calculate what he actually needs for that piece of carbohydrate that he's eating or the meal. So it's a much more complex way of calculating what insulin he actually needs. And I think it sort of opened your eyes a little bit to how much I didn't know before. I mean, I spend years and years reading and reading, trying to learn as much as possible, but there's no human in the world who's got a job and other children and activities who could make these calculations in their head, and I think that's the beauty of this system. This is sort of the view then that I've got on my phone and Finn has on his phone. So because I use an Android phone as well, I've got remote access to make any changes that I need to his system. So it's a bit of an eyesore to look at, but once you've started using it for a while, you sort of understand. So he'll have his blood sugar there at the top picture is 6.2, and that -1 is how much has changed since the last reading. The BAS is the temporary basal rate, which is running at 0 at the moment because he's trying to bring him up a little bit. You've got your sensor age, your insulin age, and your cannula age, which turn red if they get past 3 or 6 days, so you know to change them. And it also shows you the amount of insulin you've got left in the pump. If you see that graph there, the little tiny triangles, the blue triangles in the top picture at the bottom are the super micro boluses. So they are automated boluses that are giving him sort of 0.1, 0.2 tiny amounts of insulin. And then on the bottom, you can see that little bar, what looks like a bar graph on the bottom, is where the basal has been changed up or down to compensate those blood sugars. So the dark blue is where his basal rate has been the same as what's programmed into his pump. The sort of little line you can see going across is where his basal would have been, and then those bar graphs up and down are where the system has made those changes. So as you can see, there's varied ways, and the top picture there is equivalent to an extended bolus. So what the system does is, instead of like on a normal pump you would set up an extended bolus, you enter the carbs and you say how long you want those carbs to be released over, and those tiny little amounts then, instead of an extended bolus, are what is given over the course of that meal, the duration you set. And the good thing with this is as well, you can set multiple extended boluses, whereas on the pump that he was on, you could only set one at a time. Profile switches and temporary targets. So if you see in the top picture there, you've got SMB test. That's the name of the basal profile that he's on at the moment. And then his target is 6. If you click on that 6, you can then change those targets for different activities. I can do this remotely wherever I am, but he can do it on his phone as well. So you can have a custom target which you can set at any level for whatever reason. The eating soon target takes into account that he'll be consuming carbohydrates shortly, and so it aims for a blood sugar of 4 to compensate for the fact that he's going to be consuming carbs. The activity sets his blood sugar at 8 for an hour on the basis that he's going to be doing some activity, and therefore they need to set that target a little bit higher. And the hypo it sets that blood sugar at 7 for half an hour to give the body time to recover before trying to get it back down to that 6. Sorry. How do I go back? Yeah. Again, the same with the profile switches really. That gives you the option. There's several profiles we've got set up in Night Scout, which is for weekdays, weekends, school holidays. So at the click of a button, I can actually just change that on the left-hand side to any of those profiles, or just apply a percentage increase or decrease. Since we started looping in August 2019, the loop has made 20,587 temporary basal rate adjustments, which equates to over 100 per day. And what I would say, the majority of those are overnight. So again, that is why I'm so passionate about overnight testing, because especially if you haven't got a CGM, this is when his basal rates sort of need the most tweaking. And it is, I would say, probably 70 of those are overnight rather than through the day. It also gives the option where you can actually text to bolus. So my phone number is saved within the app, and I've got to enter a password. So I can actually text his phone. He's actually in the centre this morning, and when I got here, I never allow him cereal for breakfast, but I did as a treat today. And even though we pre-bolus by half an hour, his sugar was 18 this morning. So I literally can text his phone to say bolus 0.5. It asks for a code so that you can verify that you are who you are, and then it will deliver that so that the phone sends the message to the pump. But the biggest thing for me has been the nocturnal hypoglycemia. this year, on a particular Thursday of the month, Finn has a school rugby tournament from 1 till 3. He then has district rhondda training from 4 till 5:30, and then Treorchy training 6 till 7:30. So he's 6-7 hours of rugby. And this was quite often what happened the night after. So we'd be up for 2 to 3 hours consuming all sorts of carbohydrates, and it just wouldn't lift him. This on the right here now is a night after that same session, which, as you can see, the basal is just switched on and off. This tiny little bolus is being given to the point where he did go to 3.9, I think, at 7 o'clock that morning. But as you can see, it's a huge improvement to his readings overnight. We get amazing results from this. It is quite literally changed our lives. I'm getting sleep for the first time in sort of 8 years. I very rarely hear alarms through the night now. I'd say 1 out of 7 nights a week maybe. We're quite often seeing 96%, between 90 and 95% ranges for the whole day. And his first HbA1, after 3 months of using the loop, was his lowest ever at 43 or 6.1, with a very low percentage of lows. He absolutely loves it. He's learned how to use the system himself. He manages it all himself in school. And I think if anybody is interested, then I'm more than happy to speak to them. Any parents who are interested in taking this up, because it genuinely it's helped my mental health. You know, my anxiety is decreased, but it's given him the more freedom as well to be out with his friends and not having to worry about his blood sugars. And so that is, I can't recommend it enough. And like I said, the less time we spend on diabetes, the more time he gets to have fun. So these are just a few photos to finish, really, of all the things he's been getting up to the last year. And that's it. Thank you.